Okay, I found the audio files for Spiritual Adulthood, so that's why they're posted now. The first one was basically an overview to help you see the difference between spiritual adulthood and childhood. The spiritual adult can quickly comprehend at once wide ranges of scripture passages. His eyes don't glaze over. He sees the multiple layers of meaning at once, because every verse in scripture is multiple layer, not just one meaning in a verse. Deliberately, they're like skyscrapers, so that you see in context, kind of like omniscience, a lot of layers of meaning at once. Because the goal is to make you have rapport with God. And if you're going to have rapport with God, you've got to become like God is. And God sees everything at once. So that's what happens with this precept on precept living and learning on Bible. And it takes a lifetime. That's why you don't hear anything about Christ for the first 30 years of his life. And of course, spiritual babies and spiritual idiots say, oh, well, there's nothing about Christ in the Bible. You know, what happened to his early life? There's nothing there because it wasn't relevant. God leaves out what's not relevant. What's relevant is once he's mature. And, you know, you get the little incident about him being age 12 and teaching in the temple to show that he was more mature than everybody else there. And that was one of the sins that Mary sinned. She chides him when it's really her fault, you know, her and Joseph really. And he gently replies to her, how come you didn't know I'd be here? So, you know, those little things really matter, and they indicate his spiritual maturity at age 12. Well, he had to go way beyond that by age 30 because he's going to pay for the sins of the world. So spiritual maturity is way beyond what Christian theology has in mind. It is not being moral. Being moral is like, I don't know, it's like breathing. It's just a small part of the whole. Now, what then is spiritual maturity? Well, we get our cue from human maturity. Babies and children have a small mind. Their small mind is largely focused on how they feel and about themselves. And when you start talking to them in any other terms, they either get bored or fidgety, they don't understand you, or something else, because it's beyond their capacity. They do not have enough development yet to appreciate something beyond themselves, something beyond their feelings. And Christian theology is pretty much in that same place. It's all about feeling, it's all about your body, it's all about what you do. Okay, well, that's not spiritual maturity. That's spiritual childhood. So take your cue from human maturation. Basically, in human maturation, you go from being focused on yourself and how you feel and your little world to being focused on others and what principles are, and meaning beyond you is more important as you age. I mean, the guy in his 20s is running around chasing girls. He's all about how they look and how they feel. Same thing for the girls chasing the guys. But by the time you're 50, frankly, those things aren't interesting anymore. I mean, there's some interest in them, but how you look and how you feel has long since been replaced by other interests that are mostly beyond you. That's why older people tend to be more concerned with world affairs. That's why they tend to be more focused on the meaning of things. They have a longer vision, because it's no longer about them if they're mature. Okay, older doesn't necessarily mean mature. There are an awful lot of 60-year-olds out there who are going on 5 years old, even humanly. Now, soul maturation in the spiritual life follows pretty much the same pattern. the older you are as a spiritual being, because you're composed of three parts, all right? Your soul, your spirit, and your body. All right, the soul is the real you, where you do your thinking. The spirit is like a CPU. We're processing spiritual information. That's why it says in John 3, you got to be born again. That's a spiritual birth. So you can get that CPU. All right, and that's what puts you online with God, if you're using 1 John 1:9 as needed. And then your body, of course, is the house you live in, which, David is pretty funny the way he puts it in Psalm 139, 11 through 17, but nobody ever translates it properly. David basically says, that the body is a house, and he wasn't even human until born. But I'll cover that in another video. The point is that you're three parts. Each of these three parts has to mature. And then they have to interconnect, and then there's this problem of coordinating all three parts. So you're going to be unevenly mature in your body versus your soul versus your spiritual life on any given topic. And that means that some Bible doctrines you're going to absorb better and learn better and live on sooner, and you'll be more mature in them than other Bible doctrines. Just as sometimes parts of your body mature faster than other parts. Just as some parts of your soul mature faster than other parts. And it's all governed in your soul and your spiritual life by how positive you are to the information. So if, for example, you're negative to a Bible doctrine, that will retard you spiritually. And you can tell where you are. I mean, that's what the purpose of this whole series is. You can tell where you are spiritually and soulishly by the kinds of attitudes that you have on a given topic. If a given topic generates thoughts that are all about yourself and how you feel and what you want, then you're not very mature. If, on the other hand, it starts producing thoughts about the big picture, about principles, about truths, about how it affects everybody else, and you don't really think all that much about yourself because you're just not interested. Okay, you're interested in the principle of the thing. Then that tends to mean that you're more mature. Now, there's a fake maturity that occurs in adolescence where the person picks what everybody considers a big, important topic. And then he goes running off on that topic, like politics or world hunger or that stuff. Because really he's doing it to feed his ego. So you always have to check the motive here. Are you actually interested in the topic itself? Or does it make you feel like you're important to be interested in that topic? And frankly, a lot of people, they are only interested because it makes them fit in or it makes them feel important. Just like in high school, it was in to hate the teacher. It was in to denigrate doing schoolwork. It was in to make fun of the nerds who actually cared about what they were learning. Yeah, well, the world is like that. Because the world doesn't want to learn the truth. It hates the truth. Otherwise, you wouldn't have all those stupid sci-fi and horror movies. Okay? So, spiritual maturation follows the same basic pattern. As you mature spiritually, you stop being concerned about the other guy being wrong. You stop being concerned about how right you are. You start being concerned instead about how to relate to God, and you want to take every little speck of dust in your life and relate it to God. It's not a religion. It's a desire. It's a relationship. It's because you're beginning to see Him, and, it really is He increases in your life, and you decrease. Because you suddenly realize, oh, hell, I don't have to pay attention about myself or the world. I can just look at God. Okay, well, now I'm looking at God and I'm sweeping the floor. Or I'm looking at God and I'm sitting in this board meeting. All right? How can I relate this board meeting or this sweeping of the floor to God? Because that becomes your consuming interest. The thing itself relating to God Himself. Because you just want everything to be about Him. And in the final stage, the term for it in theology is called occupation with Christ. That was a very common term in the 1930s and 50s. Even in the 1970s, there was still a lot of it. I know Watchman Nee used it, and so did my pastor, but so did a lot of other pastors of that period who were trained in the 1930s. Occupied with Christ means you're thinking about Christ. Love is an occupation. What fills your thoughts, what you keep thinking about, that's where your love is. And as you age, spiritually mature, because you've been living and learning the Bible, your spiritual attitude changes to being focused on Christ. So that's what this is about. Here, the next part will cover more detail.